I don't think people realize what a massive opportunity you have to get a top score on the LSAT in September 2024 or beyond now that Logic Games is no longer on the test. Today, I'm going to walk you through what I would personally do if I wanted to score a 175 on the September 2024 LSAT or beyond. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and I personally increased my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Now, back when I took the LSAT, Logic Games were on the test and the LSAT was on paper, in person, at a testing center. Now, of course, Logic Games have been removed from the test and replaced with a second scored logical reasoning section. The LSAT's on the computer, and you have the option to take it at home using your own computer. This is great for a couple of reasons. One is that with Logic Games no longer on the test, there is less material for you to study. And if you didn't like Logic Games, if you were a humanities major like me, maybe you found Logic Games to get a little bit intimidating, a little bit scary, hard to get a handle on it. Logical reasoning, however, more reading based. And the LSAT, of course, is a test of pattern recognition, especially so in logical reasoning. You have all these different question types, all these different methods of reasoning, and the more time that you can devote to understanding those methods of reasoning, the more likely you're going to be able to spot them on test day itself. And so the fact that you can now devote 2/3 of your study time to logical reasoning rather than only 1/3 means you can now double the time that you devote to doing hundreds, maybe thousands of practice questions, so that you will have seen everything they could possibly throw at you when you get there on LSAT test day itself. Now, the September LSAT is a great option because, of course, it's not just 1 month away. You have more like a month and a half, depending on when you're watching this video. That's a good amount of time. Assuming that you're not brand new to the LSAT, you have the next 5-6 weeks maybe to devote your time to taking practice tests and reviewing them in depth. And September LSAT scores come back September 25th, meaning you can apply to law school the same month that applications open. All else being equal, better to apply to law school earlier rather than later. And so if you hit your goal score on the September LSAT, you can then apply to law school within a couple of weeks at most after law schools have opened their applications. Now, if you're not ready when September LSAT scores come back, if you do not hit your goal score, of course, you can retake the LSAT in October or November. Even January is totally fine. The January LSAT is not too late. Neither is the February LSAT, but if you can, of course, you want to give it your all between now and September to maximize the likelihood that test day itself will go smoothly. Now, I recommend taking at least ideally 10 full-length timed practice tests before the big day, so that test day itself will feel like just another run-through. This means you want to do 1 or 2 practice tests per week, along with detailed review of those tests, and you want to practice simulating the extra unscored experimental section. It could be logical reasoning. It also could be reading comp. And so whatever your worst nightmare would be, practice that now so that your first time experiencing it won't be on test day itself. And since there are 2 scored logical reasoning sections, you could have a 3rd unscored logical reasoning section. And that means all 3 of them could even be back to back on test day. Alternatively, if your worst nightmare is 2 logical reasoning sections followed by 2 reading comp sections, practice that as well. Of course, logical reasoning being 2/3 of the test, you want to practice that a bit more often because it's more likely to be your extra unscored section, meaning you're more likely to have 3 LRs and 1 RC rather than having 2 LRs and 2 RCs, because LSAC needs to test out double the number of logical reasoning sections as they do reading comp. And so using this knowledge to your advantage simply means logical reasoning should take up a lot more of your time in your LSAT prep. But of course, while there are 15 different types of logical reasoning questions, not all of them show up in equal proportion. Focus on necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Make sure you've mastered those 3, since they are the most common types of logical reasoning questions on the test. And you also want to make sure that you are aware of common misconceptions that students are under about these logical reasoning question types. So I'll walk through one for each of these. You want to make sure that you are crystal clear on the difference between necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions. Even some LSAT prep companies are confused about this, and they lump those 2 together under the catch-all category of assumption questions. Oftentimes, when a new student joins one of our programs, whether it's our one-on-one coaching program or our small group program, we find they are confused about this and they're getting questions wrong as a result, meaning they're taking a necessary assumption question to be asking for a sufficient assumption. And once we correct a student on this misconception, we oftentimes see an instant boost in their score because going forward, they're now getting all of these questions right when they used to get all of them wrong. Additionally, you want to make sure that you are clear on the distinctions within the inference category, must be true questions versus most Strongly supported questions, again, are asking for very different things. A must be true question is asking for something that is 100% guaranteed by the stimulus, while in contrast, a most strongly supported question is simply asking for something that is incredibly likely based on the stimulus, but is not necessarily 100% guaranteed. Additionally, with flaw questions, students sometimes confuse flaw and weaken, where they place a weakened question under the unreasonable burden of proof, assuming that a weakener has to destroy an argument, when in reality, a weakener simply has to make a conclusion less likely given the evidence. But we are not looking to necessarily destroy the argument, meaning the argument does not need to be fundamentally flawed. It just needs to contain a gap of some kind, and that is totally fine. Anyway, folks, that's all for now. If you need anything, reach out. I'm happy to help. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.